to the channel, everyone. Today it's time for yet another important test session on my journey towards the RC045 Club Championships. As you probably know by now, preparing for a championship means making difficult decisions, trying strange ideas, and occasionally doing things that make absolutely no sense at all. And today's experiment definitely falls into that last category. For this test, I've fitted my Arrma Talion with a set of Pro-Line MX37 tires. These tires normally live on my Kraton EXB, where they perform incredibly well and seem perfectly at home. They handle power, jumps, rough terrain, and all kinds of abuse without complaining. But then a dangerous thought entered my head. What if I put them on the Talion? Now, just because something works on one RC doesn't automatically mean it will work on another. The Talion is designed to be fast, agile, and precise. The Kraton, on the other hand, is basically a flying brick with suspension. So the big question is, can these giant tires improve the Talion, or am I about to ruin a perfectly good RC car? I have to be honest, the moment I mounted the wheels, something felt off. The Talion suddenly looked like it had spent too much time at an all-you-can-eat buffet. It looks bigger, taller, and slightly confused about its own identity. Driving it felt equally strange. My first impression is that these tires may simply be too large and too heavy for the Talion. Maybe they're fantastic for pure bashing, where the only objective is to hold the throttle wide open, ignore all common sense, and hope for the best. But when it comes to handling, corner speed, and precise control, I'm seriously wondering if this setup is actually making things worse. Of course, RC enthusiasts know one universal truth. If you don't try something ridiculous, you'll never know if it works. So today, we're putting this unusual setup to the test. Will the Talion surprise me and become even faster? Will it transform into the ultimate championship machine? Or will this experiment end in disappointment, confusion, and possibly expensive replacement parts? There's only one way to find out. Let's hit the track. After solving the first problem of the day, we were finally able to continue with today's test session. Before I had even managed to complete a proper lap, disaster almost struck. One of the wheel nuts had worked itself loose and disappeared somewhere on the track. For a brief moment, I genuinely thought that today's video was going to be extremely short. Fortunately, fellow RC enthusiast Wim came to the rescue. Luckily, he had a spare wheel nut with him and kindly allowed me to use it. Without that spare part, the Talion would have been parked for the rest of the day, and this test would have ended before it had even really started. So a big thank you to Wim for saving the day. With the Talion back on all four wheels, it was finally time to continue the experiment and see whether fitting the Pro-Line MX37 tires was a stroke of genius or a complete disaster. Unfortunately, it didn't take very long before my very first suspicions were confirmed. Sadly, the Pro-Line MX37 tires are simply not a good match for the Arrma Talion. From the very first few corners, the car just didn't feel right. It's difficult to describe exactly, but the whole driving experience felt strange and unnatural. The Talion is normally a very precise, predictable, and confidence-inspiring machine. You point it where you want to go, apply the throttle, and it does exactly what you expect. With these giant tires fitted, however, the Talion suddenly seems to have forgotten its own personality. I wasn't experiencing any noticeable improvement in grip, which was one of the things I had hoped for. The handling certainly didn't improve either. In fact, the car felt less precise and less enjoyable to drive. It almost feels as if the tires are simply too large and too heavy for the Talion's chassis setup. But the biggest issue of all is stability. The Talion now appears to have developed an overwhelming desire to spend as much time as possible upside down. Seriously, this thing rolls over at the slightest provocation. Enter a corner with a little too much enthusiasm? Onto the roof. Hit a small bump? Onto the roof. Think about steering? Probably onto the roof. Unfortunately, you'll see plenty of examples of this throughout the video. At some stage, one honestly started wondering whether I was testing new tires or training the Talion for an Olympic gymnastics event. To be fair, these tires are fantastic on my Kraton EXB, where they feel perfectly at home, but on the Talion, they simply don't seem to work. The higher center of gravity combined with the extra rotating mass completely changes the character of the car, and unfortunately, not in a positive way. Of course, this is exactly why I enjoyed testing different setups. Sometimes you discover an amazing upgrade that transforms a vehicle, and sometimes you discover a modification that should probably never be repeated again. This experiment definitely seems to belong in the second category. Still, if you never try these crazy ideas, you'll never know for sure, and at least it made for an entertaining video, especially if you enjoy watching RC cars repeatedly land on their roofs. Today's weather is the complete opposite of what I'm normally dealing with at the track. Usually, it's either cold and soaking wet, turning the entire circuit into one giant mud pit, or the rain arrives at exactly the wrong moment, usually just after I've finished cleaning my RC cars. Today, however, Mother Nature decided to surprise us. Temperatures climbed well above 30 degrees Celsius, and after weeks of battling mud and slippery conditions, the track had completely dried out. In fact, it had dried out a little too well. The surface had transformed from soft and muddy into something resembling concrete covered with a thick layer of dust. The track was incredibly hard, extremely dusty, and every passing RC car left behind a huge cloud that looked more like a desert rally than a club race. Visibility occasionally became optional rather than guaranteed. Still, despite the challenging conditions, this kind of weather is much better than the endless rain we're normally used to. And because of the sunshine, quite a few club members decided to come out and enjoy a day at the track with their amazing RC machines. And honestly, that's one of the best things about being part of a club like RC045. Whenever several members show up, it's impossible not to start some unofficial races. Nothing serious, of course, just a few friendly laps together. You know, the kind where everyone claims they're only testing their setup while secretly paying very close attention to who is faster than home. It also provides the perfect opportunity to spy on the competition ahead of the Club Championship. Purely for research purposes, obviously. Definitely not because I'm already trying to work out who I need to beat. Seeing so many beautiful RC cars on the track at the same time really adds something special to the day. Racing together, chasing each other around the circuit, comparing setups, talking nonsense in the pits, and sharing plenty of laughs, this is exactly what the RC hobby is all about. To be honest, driving with the Talion fitted with these oversized Pro-Line MX37 tires hasn't exactly been a joyful experience so far. The handling still feels wrong, the car spends far too much time upside down, and the entire experiment has been fairly disappointing. But when you're out on the track with friends and fellow club members, you almost forget that your own car is trying its absolute best to ruin your day. Almost. At least the poor Talion won't have to suffer much longer. One thing is certain, next week the original Talion tires are going straight back on. Some experiments simply teach you that the factory setup engineers knew exactly what they were doing. Sometimes the best upgrade is no upgrade at all.
Talion. Talion nästan. Ja? Var snälla med. Ja, det går långt. Alltså ideal day för de moderna barnen och jag egen avgör.
Honestly, I'm done with these tires on the Talion. At this point, I figured there was only one thing left to try. With these massive tires fitted, the Talion should at least be able to pull off a backflip, right? Well, yes, it actually did. But then, almost immediately, disaster struck once again. One of the tires decided it had enough and came unglued from the wheel. So, that's the end of today's experiment. Time to get the glue out, fix the tire, and put these wheels back where they belong, on the Kraton EXB. Not every upgrade is a success, but if you don't try these crazy ideas, you'll never know. Thanks for watching, and as always, on to the next RC adventure.